Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I don't usually talk about things like this, but today feels different. Maybe it's because of where I am in life. Or maybe it's because sometimes silence starts to hurt more than honesty. You reach a point where keeping something inside feels heavier than whatever reaction the world might have when you finally let it out. So here it is. What happened that night between my dad and JIMIN? Yeah, that night everyone's been whispering about. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. It wasn't supposed to become a scene. It wasn't supposed to get ugly. We were at the family gathering, small, private, intimate, or at least that's how it started. My mom had prepared everything with such care. The lights were warm, the table was long, and there was music playing softly in the background. It was meant to be one of those peaceful nights where love and laughter fill the air. But life has a strange way of testing you right when you think you've found balance. I had invited Jimin because he's been part of my life for more than half of it. To me, he's not just another bandmate. He's family. He's someone who's seen me at my worst and my best, who knows the version of Jungkook that doesn't exist on any stage. When Jimin walked in that evening, I could tell he felt a little nervous. He had that polite smile he uses when he's trying to make a good impression, even though deep down he's overthinking every move. My mom greeted him with warmth, she always does, but my dad stayed quiet. I noticed it right away. He sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, eyes low, the kind of silence that doesn't need words to be loud. You see, my dad and Jimin are two very different people. My dad comes from a generation that believes men should be composed, stoic, restrained. Jimin, he's hard on his sleeve, expressive, emotional. The very things I love about him are sometimes the same things my dad struggles to understand. For years, they coexisted in my life like two separate worlds. I tried to keep apart family and music until that night when those worlds finally collided. It started with a conversation that was supposed to be lighthearted. We were talking about the past, about the early BTS days, the struggles, the small apartments, the long nights. Jimin was laughing, telling my mom stories about how I used to oversleep during dance practice, how Namjoon would bang on my door while Taehyung filmed it for fun. My mom laughed so hard she almost spilled her drink for a moment. Everything was easy. But then my dad said something about priorities, about real men and family values, and the room went still. At first, I thought maybe I misheard him, but then he looked straight at Jimin and said it again, louder. You think this fame, this dancing, this lifestyle is what makes a man? His tone wasn't curious. It was sharp, like a blade that had been waiting years to cut. Jimin's smile faded, but he stayed calm. He's used to misunderstanding. He's faced critics before. But this was different. This was personal. And it was coming from someone who mattered to me. I remember how my hands started to tremble under the table. Taehyung shot me a glance, that protective one he gives when he knows I'm about to lose control. Namjoon cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the tension, but my dad kept going. He said things about how men shouldn't cry, about how loyalty to your brothers is fine, but don't forget blood comes first. The words echoed like thunder in that small room. And Jimin, he didn't argue. He just looked down, nodded slightly, and said, I understand, sir. That's when I stood up. Not in anger, but because I felt this pressure in my chest that I couldn't contain anymore. I said, Dad, please. My voice cracked, and for a second, everyone froze. My father turned his eyes to me, the same eyes that taught me discipline, respect, strength, and said, no, you listen. You've changed. He said, I wasn't the same boy who used to come home quietly after school, the one who'd help him fix the old speaker in the living room. He said, fame had made me soft, too emotional, too attached to people who weren't family. I didn't even know how to respond. Because deep down, part of what he said wasn't entirely wrong. I had changed. But I didn't see it as a bad thing. I had grown, felt more, learned to love openly, learned that family isn't always defined by blood. But in that moment, explaining that felt impossible. Jimin looked up at him with tears forming, not out of weakness, but out of restraint, the kind of tears that come when you're holding back too much dignity to defend yourself. And my dad, seeing that, misunderstood it completely. He thought Jimin was being dramatic. He didn't know that Jimin was simply trying not to break the fragile peace that held the night together. "Sir," Jimin finally said softly, "I would never try to come between you and Jungkook. He talks about you all the time. That line, that one should have ended it, but it didn't." My dad laughed bitterly, like he'd heard something naive. "He talks about me?" he said. "Then maybe he should start listening to me again." The silence after that was unbearable. My mom looked at me, eyes pleading for me to say something. Yoongi was the first to move. He got up slowly, put his hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Let's step outside." That's when I realized even he felt the weight of it, and he's not easily shaken. Jin tried to redirect the conversation towards something lighter, making a joke about how dads will always be dads, but no one laughed. The night was already broken. When Jimin stood to leave, he bowed deeply, more than he needed to. "Thank you for having me," he said, voice trembling. My dad didn't respond. He just stared at the table, as if the wood grain held some answer he couldn't find in the room. And when the door finally closed behind Jimin, something inside me collapsed. I didn't speak for the rest of the night. My mom tried to comfort me, but I just nodded and stared at my reflection in the window. My dad eventually went to bed, saying only, "We'll talk in the morning." But there were no words left. Only echoes of everything that couldn't be undone. The next morning, I sat alone in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from my untouched coffee. My phone buzzed a message from Jimin. It said, "Don't be angry at him. Parents love in the ways they understand." I read it over and over, and for the first time in a long while, I cried. Not loud, not dramatically, just quietly. The kind of crying that feels like releasing something you've been carrying too long. Later that day, I found my dad in the garden. He was fixing the same old speaker we'd built together years ago. Without looking up, he said, "I didn't mean to embarrass him." His voice cracked slightly. "I just worry you're forgetting where you came from." I told him I could never forget. But where I came from is also them, the members, the fans, the people who shaped me. He didn't reply right away. He just nodded, as if he understood but didn't know how to say it. That's the thing about fathers and sons. Sometimes love hides behind pride. Sometimes they're saying "I miss you," but the words come out as "you've changed." And sometimes it takes watching someone else get hurt for you to realize just how deep those wounds run. After that day, Jimin didn't come over for a while. He said he wanted to give my family space, but I could tell he was protecting me from more conflict. And my dad, he stayed quiet too, for weeks. But one evening, when I came home late from the studio, I found him watching a BTS performance on TV, one of the old ones. The one where Jimin sings that high note that still gives me chills. My dad didn't notice me at first. He was just staring at the screen, expression unreadable. Then he said, quietly, "He's good, really good." That moment didn't fix everything, but it healed something small inside me. Sometimes reconciliation isn't about big apologies. It's about silent acknowledgments, the kind that say, "I see you now." Looking back, I think that night happened for a reason. It forced me to face a truth I'd been avoiding. That love doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it's loud, messy, even painful. My dad loves me, but his love was shaped by a world that taught him men shouldn't cry, that affection must be earned through obedience. Jimin's love, the brotherly kind, comes from a place of openness, of emotional honesty. Two different worlds, both real, both part of me. I spent so much of my life performing, smiling on cue, saying the right thing, being strong for everyone watching. But that night reminded me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking honestly and finding your way back without losing compassion. Since then, I've tried to be more patient with the people I love, to understand that their fears often come from love itself. My dad feared losing me to the world. Jimin feared being the reason for that distance, and I feared disappointing both of them. But fear only wins when you stop listening. If I could go back to that night, I wouldn't erase it. I just hold Jimin's hand under the table and tell my dad sooner that love in all its forms is the reason I'm still standing. I'd remind him that everything he taught me about perseverance, respect, and heart, I learned it not only from him, but through BTS, through ARMY, through the family we built on stage and off it. I'm saying this now because I know someone out there might be caught between two worlds too, between where they came from and where they're going. Maybe you're struggling to make your parents understand your dreams, or maybe you've hurt someone you love while trying to protect another. If that's, this growth doesn't mean betrayal. It just means evolution. It means honoring the past without letting it control your future. That night changed me. It taught me that even the ugliest moments can reveal the deepest truths. My dad and Jimin eventually met again, months later. It wasn't planned, it was at one of our concerts. After the show, my dad came backstage. He looked at Jimin and, for the first time, smiled. He said, "You're like a second son to me." Jimin laughed, eyes glistening, and said, "I'll take that, sir." That small moment carried more healing than 1,000 apologies ever could. Now, as I stand at this crossroads in my life, a new chapter, a new beginning, I carry both of them with me. My dad's voice, strong and protective. Jimin's voice, gentle and understanding. And somewhere between those two voices, I found my own. The one that finally knows how to speak truth without fear, how to love without explanation, how to forgive without needing to forget. So if you're listening right now, wherever you are, maybe on a quiet night, maybe after a long day, remember this. The people who love you the most won't always get it right. But if you stay open, if you stay kind, the bridges you build will always outlast the walls that once stood between you. This is Jungkook, and that's what really happened. It got ugly, yes. But sometimes ugly moments lead to beautiful understanding. And maybe that's what life is, a series of imperfect moments that teach us how to love better next time. When I woke up the morning after that conversation with my dad, the sunlight through the curtains felt heavier than usual. It wasn't bright, it was slow and hesitant, like it knew the house was still holding its breath. My mom was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen, pretending everything was normal, the way mothers do when their hearts are still bruised from what they witnessed the night before. I could smell coffee, and for a second, I thought maybe the world had reset itself overnight. Maybe we could all just forget. But silence has a way of reminding you that some things don't just fade, they echo. Jimin hadn't texted me again. Usually, he'd send something small like a meme, or a photo of the sky, or just a random emoji to say, "I'm okay." But that morning, my phone stayed still. No buzz, no light. And in that stillness, I realized how fragile peace can be. One night, one misunderstanding, and years of brotherhood can suddenly feel distant. Later that afternoon, Taehyung came by unannounced. He didn't even ring the doorbell, he just walked straight in, like always. He threw his jacket on the couch, grabbed 2 cans of soda, and said, "You're not gonna sit here and mope all day, right?" I tried to smile, but it came out weak. He looked at me, saw through the act, and said quietly, "You should call him." I shook my head. I don't even know what to say. Taehyung took a long sip, looked toward the garden where my dad was still working on that old speaker, and said, "Then don't say anything. Just listen." That's something about Taehyung. He doesn't say much, but when he does, it lands deep. I called Jimin later that night. He picked up on the 3rd ring. The moment I heard his voice, I could tell he'd been crying, not recently, but enough that it still lingered in the way he breathed. I said, "Hyung, I'm sorry." He said, "You don't have to be." But he said it in that way. That means, "You do, but I understand." We talked for a while about random things at first, like the next comeback, a song idea, how the fans were reacting to the new teaser. But beneath all that small talk, there was a quiet grief. He said, "I don't blame your dad. He's just from another world. my dad would have reacted the same. That line broke something in me because I realized we'd both spent our lives trying to make older generations understand that softness isn't weakness. That love between men doesn't always have to be guarded or hidden. It can be loyal, protective, kind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the balcony with my guitar and started humming something new. Not a full song, just a melody that felt like the sound of regret and hope colliding. It reminded me of when we first debuted, when music was the only way I knew how to process pain. I thought about how far we'd come, all 7 of us, and how fragile those bonds can feel when the world starts pulling you in different directions. The next day, Namjoon dropped by. He's like a compass, always finding the center, no matter how far you drift. He didn't ask about the argument directly. He just sat down beside me and said, "Do you ever wonder why we're still together?" I laughed softly. Every day, he smiled. Maybe it's because we've learned to see each other as people, not just roles. We've failed, hurt, forgiven, and stayed. That's family. I told him what happened in detail, every word my dad said, every look Jimin gave, every moment I wanted to disappear. Namjoon listened in silence, his expression calm but his eyes full of empathy. When I finished, he said, "Your dad didn't yell because he hates Jimin. He yelled because he doesn't know how to love loudly." That line stayed with me, because maybe that's true for a lot of people. Maybe love, for some, comes wrapped in silence, pride, or fear. Later that week, my mom asked me to help her clean the living room. While we were folding the tablecloth, she said quietly, "You know your father regrets what he said." I looked at her and asked, "Did he tell you that?" She smiled sadly. "He doesn't have to. I've known him longer than anyone." She hesitated before adding, "He saw how much Jimin cares for you. It scared him." I didn't understand at first. Scared him how? Because he realized that your heart belongs to more than just family now. It belongs to the world, to your brothers, to your fans, to something he can't control. That hit me harder than I expected. Maybe that's the hardest thing for parents to watch. Their children give pieces of their heart to people they've never met, to causes they don't understand, to dreams that might take them far away. And maybe in his own clumsy way, my dad was just trying to hold on to something he thought he was losing. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, things started to settle. We had rehearsals again, video shoots, interviews. On camera, everything looked fine. But behind the scenes, there was a quiet tension between Jimin and me. We were still close, still laughed, still shared jokes, but there was something unspoken hanging between us, something that couldn't be fixed with words. Until one night during tour rehearsals, it finally broke. We were running through choreography, and I kept missing a step. My head wasn't in it. Jimin noticed and stopped the music. "Kook," he said softly, "are you okay?" Everyone turned to look. I forced a smile, said, "Yeah, just tired." But he didn't buy it. He walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "You're allowed to not be okay." That's all it took. Suddenly, I felt the weight I'd been carrying crack open. After rehearsal, we sat in the empty studio. The lights were dim, the mirrors reflecting two people who had grown up in front of the world, yet were still trying to figure out who they really were. I told them everything, how guilty I felt, how I kept replaying my dad's words, how I wished I'd defended him more. Jimin listened quietly, nodding. Then he said, "You did what you could, and your dad, he'll come around. People always do when love is real." There was a silence after that, the kind that feels sacred. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You know why your dad hit me where it hurt? Because he reminded me of my own." That line was like a knife and a hug at the same time. Because I remembered all the times Jimin had struggled to earn his father's understanding too. The late night talks, the tears he never wanted anyone to see. We sat there for a long time, two sons of different fathers, learning to forgive men who were just doing their best with the tools they had. That night, I wrote another verse. It wasn't for an album, it was just for me. It said, "The louder the love, the quieter the peace. The softer the heart, the stronger it beats." A few days later, Taehyung heard me humming it and asked what it was. I told him, "Just something personal." He said, "Then it's probably your best work." He smiled that big, bright smile that could light up a room even on the darkest day. "You know," he added, "your dad might not understand you fully, but he gave the world someone who can understand others deeply. That's his gift through you." I hadn't thought of it that way before. One evening, we were all in the dorm together again, laughing, eating ramyeon, arguing over who forgot to buy milk. For the first time since that night, it felt normal. Then Jin suddenly said, "You know, when parents yell, it's usually because they care too much." Everyone laughed, but I felt that line settle inside me. Maybe that's true. Maybe that ugly moment between my dad and JIMIN wasn't just conflict, it was care that didn't know how to express itself. Eventually JIMIN came to my house again, not for dinner, but to drop off something. He brought my favorite homemade cookies from his mom. My dad happened to be in the living room. The air was thick with that awkward tension again. But JIMIN bowed politely and said, "Sir, I wanted to thank you for raising someone who knows how to love." My dad froze. I watched his jaw tighten, then soften. He nodded once and said, "You sing beautifully." It was small, but it meant everything. Sometimes peace doesn't return in fireworks. It tiptoes in quietly, disguised as politeness. That night, my dad told me, "He's a good man, that JIMIN." I smiled because I already knew. And now, when I think about all of it, the shouting, the silence, the healing, I realize that maybe it all had to happen exactly that way. Because sometimes life needs to break open for the light to get in. Sometimes love needs to stumble before it learns how to stand. My dad yelling wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of understanding. It was a sound of generations learning how to speak the same language for the first time. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, it's about changing the way you carry it. My dad and I still have our moments. We still clash. But now, when he sees JIMIN on TV, he doesn't look away. He says, "That boy has courage." And that's enough for me. If you've ever had someone you love misunderstand the way you show love, if you've ever felt torn between loyalty and peace, just know this. Love doesn't always look gentle, but if it's real, it always finds its way back. This is Jungkook, and I'm still learning how to love without fear, how to forgive without forgetting, and how to be proud of both where I came from and who I've become. There's something strange about how pain lingers. Even after everyone has said sorry and moved on, you think it's gone. But then one small thing, a word, a glance, a memory brings it all rushing back. That's how it felt a few weeks after that night. Everything looked normal on the outside. We were performing again, filming new projects, laughing for cameras. But deep inside, there was still a quiet ache I couldn't name. It wasn't just about what my dad said. It was about everything that moment represented, the clash between the world I was born into and the world I built with my own hands. One night, after rehearsals, I found myself driving with no destination. The city lights blurred past like memories I was trying to outrun. I ended up near the old house where I grew up. The windows were dark, the paint peeling, the front yard smaller than I remembered. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the boy who used to dream inside those walls, the boy who sang too loud, cried too easily, loved too deeply. My dad used to tell me, "Don't wear your heart on your sleeve, Jungkook. The world doesn't play fair." But I never learned how to hide it. Music taught me to bleed beautifully, to turn ache into melody, fear into rhythm. Maybe that's why JIMIN and I understood each other so well. He wears his soul like a second skin too. When I got home that night, I couldn't sleep. So I went to the practice room. The building was empty, the mirrors cold. I sat on the floor with my hoodie pulled up and played back some of our old rehearsal footage. There was one video where JIMIN and I were practicing Lie, and we kept messing up the timing. We laughed so hard we couldn't even finish the song. Watching it, I felt something shift inside me, a reminder that behind every performance, every tear, every headline, there were just two kids who loved to move and create. Nothing more, nothing less. Around that time, Yoongi called me late one night. That's rare for him. He doesn't usually do late calls unless it's something that matters. He said, "I heard about what happened with your dad." His voice was calm, like he was talking about the weather. You know, people think forgiveness is something you do for others, but sometimes it's the only way to free yourself. I asked him, "How do you forgive someone who doesn't even realize they hurt you?" He said, "By understanding they were hurting too." Then he hung up like he always does, dropping wisdom like a stone in water and leaving you to watch the ripples. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I didn't want resentment to build roots in me. So I decided to talk to my dad again. I didn't plan a big confrontation. I just walked into his workshop where he was fixing an old clock. He didn't look up right away. I said, "Dad, do you ever think about the boy I used to be?" He paused, then nodded. "Every day." I said, "That boy learned everything from you. How to work hard, how to dream, how to respect people. You taught me to never give up, even when I fail. But you also taught me to love. Maybe not the way you meant to, but I learned." He finally looked up, his eyes soft. "I guess I don't say it enough," he said quietly, "but I'm proud of you, son." That sentence felt like air after drowning. It wasn't a grand apology, it wasn't a speech, but it was real, and sometimes that's enough. Later that week, I went to JIMIN's apartment. He opened the door in his pajamas, holding a mug of tea, his hair messy and soft. He smiled and said, "You look like you've been thinking too much." I laughed. "You always know." We sat on the couch for hours, talking about everything and nothing. About childhood, about fear, about how weird it is to be known by millions and still misunderstood by the ones who matter most. At one point, I told him what my dad said, that he was proud of me. JIMIN's eyes lit up. "That's huge, Kook. You should hold on to that." I nodded. Then he said something that stayed with me. Parents don't always need to understand everything we are. They just need to remember they raised someone good. We talked about forgiveness, about how it doesn't erase pain but transforms it. JIMIN said he'd already let go of that night. "Your dad was just protecting you," he said. "If he didn't care, he wouldn't have said anything." That perspective changed me. I started to see love not as perfection, but as persistence. My dad didn't know how to express it the way I needed, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. As the days went by, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the people around me. RM, who carries the weight of wisdom like an older brother holding the map for all of us. Jin, who hides depth behind laughter. Hobi, who radiates light even when he's tired. Yoongi, who speaks little but means everything. Taehyung, whose friendship feels like silence you can trust. And JIMIN, who feels like home in human form. These people have become my family in ways I can't even describe. And Army, you've been the bridge between all of it. You've seen the cracks and stayed anyway. You've loved me even when I didn't know how to love myself. One night after rehearsal, I was sitting alone in the darkened stage. And I thought about everything, the fights, the forgiveness, the years that shaped us. I realized that every storm in my life had led me back to the same truth. Love always finds a way through. It's never clean or easy, but it's always worth it. A few months later, we had a concert in Busan. My parents were in the audience for the first time in a while. During one of the songs, I looked down from the stage and saw my dad clapping. Really clapping, not politely, but proudly. Beside him, my mom was crying. I saw JIMIN glance toward them too, then look at me with a small smile. And for the first time since that night, I felt everything align the past. The pain, the healing, all of it, blending into one clear moment of peace. After the show, my dad came backstage again. He didn't say much, just hugged me tightly. And when he pulled away, he turned to JIMIN and said, "You were incredible tonight. Jimin bowed and said, "Thank you, sir." My dad nodded and added, "Call me father next time." Everyone laughed. It was awkward, but it was beautiful. It felt like something that had been broken was quietly stitched back together with laughter. Later that night, as we all sat in the hotel room, Taehyung said, "See, I told you families fight, but they always find their way back." Jin threw a pillow at him, and everyone started laughing again. It felt like the end of a long winter, like warmth had finally returned to the room. I thought about everything I learned since that night. That love isn't about always agreeing, it's about staying, even when you don't understand. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace over pride. And that sometimes the people who yell the loudest are the ones who love the deepest but don't know how to say it softly. Now, whenever I see my dad watching our performances, I see not just pride but understanding. He doesn't see fame anymore. He sees purpose. He sees his son doing what he was meant to do. And that's all I ever wanted. There's a line I wrote recently, one that might never become a song, but I keep it close. Some hearts speak in silence, some in storms, but all love means to be heard. If you're listening right now and you've ever been caught in the middle of misunderstanding between generations, between dreams and expectations, just know this: you don't have to choose one side of yourself to belong. You can be both the child who honors your roots and the adult who grows beyond them. You can love the people who hurt you and still protect your peace. You can rebuild bridges without pretending the fire never happened. That's what I learned from my dad, from Jimin, from all of it. Love isn't perfect, it's just honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is the beginning of everything beautiful. There's a moment right before a concert starts when everything goes silent. The lights dim, the crowd's roar turns into a kind of humming heartbeat, and for a split second, you feel weightless, like time has paused just for you. That's the moment I live for. Not the fame, not the applause, just that breath before the world begins again. It's the same silence I felt months after that night when my dad yelled at Jimin. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it was sacred. It was the sound of peace returning after a storm that nearly tore something irreplaceable apart. By the time our world tour started again, things had changed. Not drastically, not overnight, but quietly, like dawn seeping in after a long, sleepless night. My dad and I talked more now, not about what happened, but about small things, food, music, even my dog Bam. He'd send me photos of Bam running around the garden, his tail wagging, the same garden where that argument once echoed through the night. It was his way of saying, "I'm still here." One morning, before leaving for Japan, I called him. "Dad," I said, "thank you for trying." He chuckled softly. "Trying what?" "Just understanding." There was a pause. Then he said, "I may never fully understand, but I see you, son, and I see the people who love you. That's enough." I smiled so wide my face hurt. That's the thing about love. It doesn't need perfection. It just needs effort. Jimin didn't bring up that night anymore, but sometimes when we were alone, his eyes said it all. He forgave quietly, the way he always does, without words, without asking for anything in return. There was one night in particular, after a show in Tokyo, when we were sitting in the hotel hallway, both too wired to sleep. The city lights painted our reflections on the glass, and Jimin said, "You know, when your dad yelled, I didn't feel angry. I just felt sad for him, because I realized how much he must love you to fear losing you that much." I didn't respond right away. My throat felt tight. Then I said, "He doesn't show it the way we do." Jimin nodded. "Yeah, but it's still love, just a different language." That hit me harder than anything, because I realized that's what life is, a collection of people trying to love each other in different languages. Some use words, some use silence, some use anger, some use music. My dad's language was protection. Jimin's was empathy. Mine was honesty. As the tour continued, I started talking more openly on stage. Not about the argument specifically, but about connection. About how love can be messy and beautiful at the same time. I remember one night in Manila, I said to the crowd, if you've ever hurt someone you love, don't give up on fixing it. Sometimes the apology is in your actions, not your words. The fans screamed and the lights flashed, but inside it felt like I was whispering that line to myself. During our Seoul concert, I looked out at the audience and saw my family sitting together, my mom, my dad, and my brother. My dad wasn't just clapping this time, he was smiling, genuinely smiling. And beside him was Jimin's mom, cheering louder than anyone. I saw my dad glance at her, then back at Jimin, and they both nodded slightly. That small exchange, so simple, so quick, felt like the final bridge being built. After the concert, backstage was chaos, the usual rush of staff, cameras, hugs, laughter. But in the corner, my dad stood with Jimin. They were talking quietly. I froze, afraid to interrupt, afraid to breathe. Then I saw my dad laughing, like really laughing, head tilted back, eyes crinkled. Jimin was grinning. I don't even remember what they said, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Whatever pain existed between them had turned into something softer, something that could finally rest. Later that night, I went for a walk. The city was asleep, but my thoughts weren't. I kept replaying everything that had led to that moment. The yelling, the silence, the forgiveness, the healing. And I realized something profound. Love isn't linear. It doesn't move cleanly from hurt to healing. It loops, it stumbles, it tests you, it teaches you through repetition until you finally learn. The next morning before flying out, my dad handed me something wrapped in an old cloth. Open it when you're alone, he said. On the plane, I unwrapped it and found our old speaker, the one from years ago, the one we used to fix together. Except this time, it was fully restored, polished, working. Inside the box, there was a note that said, for the music that connects, what words can't. I cried quietly in my seat, hiding my face under a blanket. That's the thing about fathers. They don't always say the right things, but when they love, it's through action. A few weeks later, during an interview, someone asked me, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to forgive? I smiled and said, myself, because that's the truth. For a long time, I blamed myself for what happened, for inviting Jimin that night, for not stopping the argument sooner, for the pain it caused. But forgiveness isn't complete until you let yourself off the hook too. I realized that if I wanted to be free, I had to stop replaying the past like an old recording. I had to accept that we're all just doing the best we can with the love we understand. One evening, Taehyung came to my studio. He saw the speaker sitting on the shelf and said, your dad gave you that, huh? I nodded. It's fixed now. He smiled and said, guess that means you both are too. He started strumming my guitar, humming something soft, something unfinished. I joined in, and before we knew it, we were writing a song together. It wasn't for the group or the charts, it was just for us. We called it Louder Than Words. It was about love that doesn't always sound pretty, but always means something. We played it for the members a week later. When the last chord faded, Jimin said, that's it. That's what healing sounds like. Even Yoongi nodded in agreement, which is rare. Months passed and life went on. Projects, travels, laughter, growth. But every once in a while, when I'd call home and hear my dad's voice, I'd think back to that night and feel grateful. Grateful for the chaos, the confrontation, the honesty, because without it, none of this peace would exist. I think that's what people misunderstand about love. It's not about avoiding the ugly parts. It's about facing them with enough courage to let them change you. Sometimes, the moments that almost break you end up being the ones that shape you the most. Now, when I look at Jimin on stage, when I see the light in his eyes, I know that what we went through wasn't just a fight, it was a lesson. A reminder that love can survive misunderstanding, that real connection can bend without break. And when I see my dad in the crowd, I see not just the man who yelled, but the man who learned, the man who tried, the man who fixed what was broken piece by piece just like that speaker. If you're listening right now, wherever you are, maybe you've had your own version of that night, your own argument, your own heartbreak, your own moment when everything seemed to fall apart. I want you to know it's okay. Don't run from it. Let it teach you. Let it soften you. Because the same pain that once makes you question everything can one day become the proof that love was real all along. This is Jungkook, and I'm still learning, still growing, still forgiving, still singing for every heart that ever broke and healed again. Because in the end, that's what life is. One long song with verses of pain and choruses of grace. And if you listen closely enough, even the ugly parts start to sound like music. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with a bang. It slips in quietly through the smallest of moments, a laugh that feels effortless again, a glance that no longer stings, a silence that finally feels safe. That's how it was in the months after everything happened. The noise had faded, the headlines had moved on, and yet, inside me, something softer had started to grow peace. Real, fragile peace. The kind you don't announce, the kind you just live. It was a Sunday morning when I felt it most. I was home in Busan for the first time in months. The air smelled like sea salt and coffee, and for once, there was no schedule waiting for me. My dad was in the kitchen, humming something off-key while cooking breakfast. The same man who once yelled at JIMIN in anger was now gently stirring eggs and asking if I wanted toast or rice. It's funny, love doesn't erase the past, but it redefines it. It gives the same people new meaning. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, "I saw your latest performance." I froze, expecting a critique, but he smiled instead. "You looked happy." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "That's all I ever wanted," he added. That line, simple, quiet, human, landed deeper than any apology could. Because for the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to shape me anymore. He was letting me be. After breakfast, he pulled out something from the cabinet. It was a photo of me and Jimin from our trainee days. We looked so young, so uncertain. My dad studied it for a moment and said, "You both grew up together, didn't you?" I said yes. "Then that makes him family." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. That was his way of rewriting the story, of taking what once was painful and turning it into belonging. Later that day, Jimin came by. He was in town visiting his parents, and I asked him to stop over. When he walked in, my mom hugged him like nothing had ever happened. My dad came out from the backyard, wiping his hands on the towel. For a moment, everyone froze. It was the same setting as that night, but the energy was different. This time, there was no tension, no weight. My dad said, "You're just in time for coffee." And Jimin laughed, shy but relieved. They really talked for the first time about Busan, about food, about music. My dad even asked him for a signed album, joking that his coworkers didn't believe his son's friend was that Jimin. It was surreal to watch two people who once stood on opposite sides of an emotional battlefield now sitting across from each other, laughing like old friends. When Jimin left that evening, he whispered to me, "He's changed." I said, "So have we." And maybe that's the truth, people change when love gives them permission to. That night, I went out for a walk. The city was quiet, the ocean shimmering in the distance. I thought about everything that led to this, not just that one argument, but the entire journey. My father's expectations, my own guilt, Jimin's forgiveness, the quiet strength of my mom, the steady guidance of the members, and the constant love of ARMY that never wavered through any of it. It all felt connected, like different verses in the same song. As I walked past the harbor, a memory hit me, a conversation I'd had with Namjoon years ago. We were sitting on the rooftop after a long day, and he said, "You know, Kook, one day you'll realize that your greatest challenge isn't fame or pressure. It's learning how to stay soft in a world that wants to harden you." Back then, I didn't fully understand it, but now I do. That night with my dad, that silence afterward, that forgiveness. It was all about staying soft. It was about keeping my heart open, even when it hurt. When I got home, my mom was sitting on the couch knitting. She looked up and said, "He's proud of you, you know." I smiled. "I think I finally am too." She reached over and touched my hand. "You always were," she said softly. The next day, before I left for Seoul, my dad gave me a small box. Inside was a photo of me and JIMIN, now framed. "Put it somewhere you can see it," he said. "So you don't forget who stood beside you before the world did." I didn't say anything, just hugged him. It was awkward at first. Korean dads aren't big on hugs, but then he patted my back and said, "Tell him I said thank you." On the train back to Seoul, I looked out the window and thought about how far we'd all come. Not just me and my dad, but all of us. The boys, the family, the fans. We've lived through so many versions of ourselves, made mistakes, learned, forgiven, grown, and yet every version still belongs. Every version still matters. When I got to the dorm, the guys were already there, laughing about something Taehyung did on live. It felt like home, chaotic, warm, familiar. I showed them the frame photo, and Jin said, "Wow, your dad's taste isn't bad." Everyone laughed. But Jimin looked at it for a long time. His smile, quiet, eyes glassy. He said, "He really sees me now, huh?" I nodded. "He does." That night, we stayed up late, eating takeout and talking about life. Yoongi said, "It's crazy how time changes people," Hobie added. "Or maybe it just shows who they really were all along." And maybe that's it. Time doesn't change love. It just reveals its depth. Later, when everyone went to bed, I stayed up, sitting by the window with my notebook. I started writing, not lyrics this time, but thoughts about forgiveness, about growth, about how sometimes the hardest people to forgive are the ones who love you the most because their mistakes hurt deeper. But I also wrote about gratitude for the people who stay, for the hearts that try, for the peace that comes after the storm. And then I realized something else. That moment when my dad yelled, as painful as it was, became a turning point. Not a tragedy. It was the moment everything hidden came to light. The moment love learned a new language. Now, when I think of him, I don't think of anger. I think of a man doing his best with the tools he had. I think of the speaker he fixed, the meals he cooks, the quiet pride in his eyes when he watches me perform. And I think of Jimin, who stood through it all with grace. Sometimes I wonder what my younger self would say if he could see this version of me sitting in a quiet room, grateful for both the hurt and the healing. I think he'd smile. Maybe he'd say, "So this is what growing up feels like." And maybe that's all this story ever. It was not a scandal, not a fight, not a heartbreak, but a reminder that even the ugliest moments can bloom into something beautiful if you don't give up on love. So if you're listening right now and you're carrying something heavy, something unresolved with someone you care about, don't wait for the perfect time to make it right. Just start. Say sorry. Say thank you. Say I love you, even if it feels strange on your tongue. Because time doesn't heal everything, but love does when you let it. This is Jungkook, and if I've learned anything from my dad, from Jimin, from life, it's that sometimes the loudest healing happens in silence. The kind where nobody's watching, the kind where two people quietly decide to love each other better than before. There are nights when I can't sleep, not because I'm worried or sad, but because the quiet reminds me of everything I've lived through. The laughter, the anger, the forgiveness, they all echo differently when the world goes still. I've learned that silence isn't emptiness. It's the sound of truth settling after a storm. That's what my life feels like now. Not perfect, not easy, but settled in its own kind of peace. It's strange how something as small as one night, one outburst, one misunderstanding can become a mirror that shows you who everyone really is. I used to think that night when my dad yelled at Jimin would haunt me forever, but now I see it differently. It was A breaking point, yes, but it was also a beginning, the start of real understanding between generations, between friends, between what love is supposed to look like and what it actually is. A few months later, we had another family dinner. This time, I invited everyone, the members, my family, even some of the staff who've been with us since the beginning. The house was filled with laughter and music. My mom was glowing. My dad was in charge of the grill, pretending not to care when everyone praised his cooking. JIMIN was right beside him, helping, handing him tongs, making small jokes. You could feel the shift. There was no tension anymore, just warmth. At one point, my dad called across the yard, "JIMIN, come taste this!" Everyone froze for a second, then burst into laughter. JIMIN walked over, took a bite, nodded, and said, "You're getting better, sir." My dad grinned. "Maybe you're just getting used to my style." It was lighthearted, but in that small exchange, there was history, healing, and humility. It was two men finally meeting in the middle, not as opponents, but as family. As the night went on, I sat back and just watched. RM was talking to my mom about philosophy, of course, while Jin was making everyone laugh so hard they almost choked. Taehyung was chasing my nieces around the garden, his laughter carrying into the night. Yoongi was quietly helping clean up plates, humming one of our songs under his breath. Hobi was showing my dad how to use Instagram. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos, the kind that reminds you you're alive. I looked at Jimin across the table, his face lit by the warm glow of the string lights, and I thought about how far we'd all come. From strangers chasing dreams to brothers surviving storms, from awkward dinners to moments like this, unguarded, real, human. My dad caught me staring and raised his glass slightly. It wasn't a toast, but it felt like one. Later that night, after everyone left, my dad and I sat outside together. The air smelled of smoke and salt. He said, "You know, when you were little, I used to worry the world would change you. I thought fame would take the boy I knew and turn him into someone I couldn't recognize." He paused, then smiled. "But now I see you've changed the world instead, at least a part of it that belongs to you." I didn't know what to say. My throat burned with emotion, so I just said, "Thanks, Dad." He nodded, took a deep breath, and said something I'll never forget. "I was wrong about Jimin. That boy's got more strength in his heart than most men I know." I laughed softly. "You should tell him that." "I just did," he said, eyes twinkling. It hit me then how different he was from the man who once raised his voice in anger. Time had softened him, but love had changed him. And I think watching me love people who weren't bound by blood taught him something new about family. After that, everything started feeling lighter. I found myself more open too, more willing to talk about emotions, to tell people I love them without hesitation. Even with the members, I noticed we talked differently. Not about work or schedules, but about life, about things that scared us, about dreams we hadn't dared to say out loud before. One night, during our overseas tour, we were in a hotel suite, all of us sitting on the floor, surrounded by takeout boxes. Jimin said, "You ever think about what kind of dads we'll be?" Everyone laughed, but I knew he wasn't joking. Yoongi said, "I'll be the quiet one, the type that just nods and says, but actually cares deeply." Jin said, "I'll cook for my kids every day. They'll never eat junk food." Taehyung said, "I'll be the cool dad. Sunglasses, guitar, the works." Hobi said, "I'll make my kids dance before they can walk." Namjoon smiled and said, "I'll teach them how to question everything." Then Jimin looked at me. "What about you, Jungkook?" I hesitated. "I think I just want to listen, really listen, even when I don't understand." The room went quiet for a second, and then Namjoon said, "That's how you break the cycle, Kook." That hit deep, because that's exactly what this whole journey had been about, breaking the cycle. Taking the pain we inherited and turning it into something better. Taking silence and turning it into understanding. Taking pride and turning it into love. A few days later, I called my dad again. I told him about that conversation. He laughed. "You'll be a good dad one day," he said. Better than me. You were good too, I replied. Just different. There was a pause. Then he said, different can be good. When I hung up, I sat there for a while thinking about how everything connects: the hurt, the love, the forgiveness, the growth. I realized that every version of me, the scared kid, the angry son, the forgiving man, they all exist together. They all built who I am today. The next week, JIMIN sent me a photo. It was him and my dad at a cafe in Busan. My dad had apparently called him up on his own to grab lunch. They were both smiling, genuinely, comfortably. JIMIN captioned it, "Guess who paid?" I laughed so hard I almost dropped my phone. But behind that laugh was something deeper: pride, relief, gratitude. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror before a show. The lights were dim, and I looked at my reflection, the tattoos, the scars, the boy who grew into a man who still believes in love. And for the first time, I didn't see the kid who had to choose between family and friendship. I saw someone who learned to keep both. I whispered to myself, this is who I am now. Not perfect, not finished, but free. And as the stage lights came on, I thought of my dad's words that maybe the world didn't change me after all. Maybe it just showed me how to love harder. So if you're listening right now, wondering how to forgive someone, how to start again, how to turn something broken into something beautiful, let this be proof that you can. That it's never too late for love to learn a new shape. That even if things get ugly, even if words are said that you wish you could take back, love will always find its way back home if you let it. This is Jungkook, and I've learned that strength isn't about holding everything in. It's about letting your heart stay open, even after it's been bruised. Because when you do, life stops being about surviving and starts being about understanding. Sometimes I think about legacy, not the kind written in headlines or carved into trophies, but the one whispered through generations. The invisible chain of lessons, mistakes, love, and silence passed down from parent to child and then reshaped into something new. That's what my life feels like now. A long thread stretching backward and forward, connecting my dad's voice, my mom's prayers, my brother's laughter, and the echo of every fan who ever called my name. After that night of forgiveness, something in me started to shift. I didn't notice it at first. It wasn't loud. It was subtle, like a steady heartbeat guiding me forward. I began to pay attention to my thoughts, to my emotions, to the little signs life gives when you're finally ready to listen. I think I was learning how to live, not just exist. We were in Los Angeles at the time, finishing up the tour. I remember sitting on the rooftop of our hotel with JIMIN, watching the city glow beneath us. He asked me, "Do you ever think about how everything could have gone differently?" I said, "Every day." He nodded slowly. "But maybe it wasn't supposed to." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled. "If your dad never yelled that night, none of this healing would have happened. Maybe that pain had to exist for love to evolve." That sentence stuck with me. I realized that every scar I carried, every argument, every sleepless night, every heartbreak had shaped me into someone capable of empathy. Someone who could see pain not as an enemy, but as a teacher. When we returned to Korea, I visited my family again. My dad was in the backyard fixing a bicycle for one of the neighbor's kids. He looked up, surprised but happy. "Back already?" he said. I shrugged. "I missed home." He smiled and handed me a wrench, then helped me. We worked in silence, the kind of silence that used to be uncomfortable but now felt like a conversation in itself. When we finished, he patted the bike and said, "Perfect." I knew he wasn't just talking about the bike. That evening, I played him a demo of a new song. I'd been working on a simple track, just piano and voice. It was about forgiveness, about finding beauty in the moments that hurt the most. He listened quietly, then said, "That's not just music, son. That's understanding." I didn't respond, but I felt tears pressing behind my eyes. For years, I'd been chasing perfection. Now, I just wanted connection. A week later, I got a text from J-Hope. It said, "Family dinner soon?" I laughed because somehow it had become a tradition. So, we planned another one at my house this time. When everyone arrived, my dad greeted them at the door like old friends. He even called Yoongi Professor because he'd been producing so much music lately. Jin joked that he was finally the cool father-in-law of BTS. My mom couldn't stop smiling. Halfway through dinner, my dad stood up and cleared his throat. The table went quiet. "I want to say something," he began. My heart dropped for a second. I thought he was about to embarrass me again, but instead, he said, "I used to think strength meant never apologizing. I used to think love meant control, but I was wrong. Watching you all, I've learned something. Real strength is admitting when you were wrong. Real love is letting people be who they are." No one moved for a few seconds. Then Jimin raised his glass. "To learning," he said softly. Everyone followed. My dad smiled. "To learning." That moment felt sacred, like something invisible in the air had been forgiven once and for all. Not just between him and Jimin, but between generations of fathers and sons who'd never known how to say, "I'm sorry." After dinner, my dad pulled me aside. He said, "You know, when I see you with your brothers, I see what I wanted for myself. A family that talks, that listens, that forgives. Don't lose that. I promised I wouldn't." And I meant it. The next day, I was in the studio when Namjoon walked in. He said, "I heard about last night. Your dad's speech is trending in our hearts." We laughed. Then he said, "Do you ever realize how your story, what you're living right now, isn't just yours anymore? People learn from it. They heal because of it." That hit me hard because I never set out to be a lesson. I just wanted to be honest. But maybe honesty is the lesson. Later that week, I got a letter from a fan. It said, "Your story about your dad and Jimin helped me talk to my father for the first time in years. Thank you for being brave enough to feel." I read that line over and over. It made me realize that pain doesn't end with you. It transforms when you share it. It becomes a bridge for someone else. Sometimes I think about that bridge. How fragile it is, yet how strong. Built not from perfection, but from truth. Every apology, every hug, every tear adds another beam of understanding. And maybe that's what life really is. A lifelong construction of bridges between hearts that once stood apart. One evening, Jimin and I were walking home from the studio. He said, "Do you ever think your dad and I will laugh about that night one day?" I said, "I think you already do." He chuckled. Maybe the world just needed that moment so we could all grow up. When I got home, I found my dad watching our latest performance again. He didn't say anything, just motioned for me to sit beside him. We watched in silence, the crowd cheering through the screen. Then he turned to me and said, "When you're on stage, I don't see a performer anymore. I see a man who turned pain into light." I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "That's because you taught me how to fix things." He smiled. "And you taught me how to feel." I think about that line a lot, because that's what this whole journey has been. Two people teaching each other how to love better. It's what every relationship should be. Not a competition of who's right, but a collaboration of who's willing to grow. As I write this now, I realize that night wasn't a mistake. It was a miracle in disguise. A messy, painful, necessary miracle. The kind that breaks you open so the light can finally get in. So if you're listening right now, and you're holding on to something unsaid, say it. If there's someone you've stopped understanding, try again. Because love isn't about being right, it's about being real. And sometimes, being real means being wrong first. This is Jungkook, and I've learned that love, no matter how imperfect, is the only thing worth fighting for. Because when everything else fades, fame, fear, even pride, love is what stays. It's what rebuilds, it's what heals, and sometimes the most beautiful thing you'll ever hear isn't applause or praise. It's the quiet voice of someone you thought you lost saying, "I understand you now." There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from the world getting easier, it comes from you getting softer. That's where I am now. Not unhurt, not untouched, but softer in the best way possible. Every argument, every tear, every quiet night staring at the ceiling, they've all shaped the way I see life. I used to think growing up meant building walls. Now I know it's about taking them down one brick at a time. The weeks after my dad's dinner speech felt different. It was as if the house itself had learned how to breathe again. My mom hummed in the kitchen, my dad laughed more, and even Bam seemed to sense it, wagging his tail for no reason, curling up beside my chair as if to say, "It's okay now." But the truth is, peace doesn't mean the story's over. It just means the storm has passed long enough for you to see what survived. For me, what survived was love. Complicated, messy, human love. The kind that doesn't ask to be perfect, only to be real. I think that's what my dad was trying to say in his own way all along. He didn't hate JIMIN. He feared losing me to fame, to distance, to a world he didn't understand. But fear disguises itself as anger sometimes. And love, when it's scared, forgets how to speak gently. One afternoon, while I was back in Seoul, my dad called me out of nowhere. He said, "I saw JIMIN on TV again." I laughed. "Which show?" "Some variety show," he said. "He was talking about you." I froze. "What'd he say?" My dad chuckled. "He said you make everyone around you feel safe." "I didn't know that about you." I smiled quietly. "He always sees what others miss. He's a good friend,